Hey guys, today's episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by the Sports Spectrum Magazine. I'm telling you, it's probably the best thing that we do here at Sports Spectrum, a quarterly magazine, 4 issues each year, and it's super cheap, $18 for a 1-year subscription, $30 for a 2-year subscription. The Sports Spectrum Magazine has been around since 1985 with Dr. J. Julius Irving on the cover. And so I want to recommend that you check out the Sports Spectrum Magazine. It makes a great resource. It's perfect for the kiddos. So you can check it out at sportspectrum.com right now to subscribe and get our Sports Spectrum Magazine. Sportspectrum.com. Subscribe today.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Our website, sportspectrum.com. That's the place to go for all of our content here at the Ministry of Sports Spectrum. Devotionals, podcasts, articles, stories, videos, all free and all available at sportspectrum.com. And then you can email me directly if you have a guest idea or some feedback on today's show. Jason@sportspectrum.com is my email address. Jason@sportspectrum.com. And today on the show, this guy has one of the more incredible transformational stories you'll ever hear. His name is Scott Harrison. He is the CEO of Charity Water. And if you don't know about Charity Water, go check out thespring.com. You can learn more about Charity Water, all of the people that they're helping bring clean water to around the world. I remember donating my birthday and raising funds for Charity Water when I turned 40 years old back in 2013. And we raised like $1,200, which was great. Had a lot of generous people that were willing to come alongside with me to help raise money for clean water. I could not believe the numbers when Scott told me in our conversation of people who are still going without clean water in this world. And so love what Charity Water is about and glad that Scott was willing to come on and share his story. We found some commonality in the sports space too, and he's got a couple great stories that he's going to share that connect sports and certainly his walk with Jesus and his great work with Charity Water. Take a listen to Scott Harrison joining us now on Sports Spectrum. Hey, Scott Harrison, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Good to see you. Good to talk to you. We've run in circles with a lot of the same people, I'll just say, over the years. And it was weird because I remember hearing you, maybe 4 years ago on Bill Simmons' podcast.
Yes.
And I'm like, wait, a lot of the podcasts I listen to, I hear Scott Harrison's story, but I did not expect you to pop up on Simmons' podcast.
I know. I got to tell you this. I'll tell you the story of how that happened. I was in Los Angeles promoting I was doing basically a small screening where I was presenting to a group of about 30 people, and the host had invited Bill, and I had never heard of Bill before. So it's like I was living under a rock. And, there were a bunch of really interesting LA people there, potential donors. It was a great crowd, 30 people or so. And then the next morning I was supposed to be on a 7:00 flight for a really important meeting in Las Vegas, and then a speech. And at the end of the night, Bill had seen the talk and he said, I'd like to have Scott on the podcast. But it needs to, I'm willing to record a special one tomorrow morning. And I'm like, yeah, but I got to go to Las Vegas. And the host pulled me aside and he's like, Scott, you are canceling your flight to Las Vegas. You are canceling whoever you need to meet. And you are going to be at Bill's office at 7:30 or 8 a.m. tomorrow and do exactly what he tells you to do. And I think that podcast raised $1 million.
Did it really?
Yeah, at least $1 million.
I mean, that probably showed you the power of the show, right?
People weren't. I don't think people were expecting to hear about water or stories of of the water crisis around the world, and he's a deeply compassionate, generous human being. So it was quite an experience. But I was a naive guy going in, like I can't cancel my flight. And, my friends had to intervene, pull me off to the side and say, oh, yes, you will. we will take your phone. We'll take your license away from you.
Well, then you saw the results of that, obviously, not just
exactly.
$1 million,
were right.
but
They were right.
There's a lot of people that listen, including myself, that listen to his show.
They were right.
That's great. Now, so there's a sports connection there. Are you a big sports fan? Or did you grow up loving sports, or are you not really?
Jason, I'm a playoff fan. I like anything when it counts. So I will watch the playoffs of everything. I've got a 7-year-old boy, a 5-year-old daughter. So, and we kind of starting at the championships, when it gets down to the last 8, we'll just turn it on and we'll watch.
Are your kids into sports?
Yeah. So baseball, I grew up playing baseball and soccer. I was a little guy. So football and basketball were out of the question. And loved baseball. That was my favorite sport. And we've, through the Charity Water Network, a few of our donors own teams. So we've had, the kids have had pretty special experiences. And I'm like, this is not the experience most people get. Okay. They don't go to their first hockey game and get handed a puck off the ice,
right?
Because, somebody was like, oh, give the kid a good experience. You don't get to go meet the players at your experience. So the kids have been able to draft on some pretty cool. I'll just tell you one other story, Jason. So I was doing a book tour, and this is a few years ago, and it was in Boston. And I think I just finished 16 cities.
Oof.
And I was exhausted.
Yeah.
And I'd landed on a Friday night, and I was supposed to fly to Boston early and speak around noon. And it was one of those things that had been billed as a 15,000 person conference. And then I learned the night before that the keynote room held 150. So it was one of those conferences where people go to exhibit and not actually to hear anybody talk. Right. And this is happening, you'd think I'd learned my lesson. I flew to Cannes once for the same kind of thing. It's like, 10,000 people will be there. And there were 60 in the room.
Yes.
And so, it wasn't paid. And, the conference organizer had said, hey, it's a new conference, but we've had all these great writers before. You should come. It's a great audience. And I remember getting in so tired on Friday and writing the organizers and saying, I just don't think I can do it. Is it like, can I please get out of it? Can I please get a pass? I wanted them to give me the permission to, bail on the commitment. And I remember my wife was like, oh, you're going to get on that plane tomorrow. If you said you're going to do it, you're going to do it, fulfill your commitment. So I said, well, I'm going to bring my kid then, and we'll go, I don't know, we'll run around Boston and go to, Fenway Hall, Faneuil Hall or whatever. I remember going as a kid. So anyway, I go to the conference. There may be 100 people there. I give an hour talk. I'm exhausted. And I walk to the back with my son, and the conference organizer says, hey, it's the start of the playoffs tonight. Do you want to go to a Red Sox game? And I said, well, what time does it start? And she said, well, it starts at, I think it was 8:00. I said, well, that sounds great. I've never been to Fenway. And I said, but my kid's bedtime is 7. So she said, well, do you want the tickets or not? I'll send them to the hotel. I said, I'll take the tickets. So I go home. It's 3:00. I put all the lights out. I put on Moonlight Sonata. I'm like, you're going to take a nap because we're going to a baseball game tonight. And we get there. And it turned out that she owned the team.
Oh my gosh.
So we're sitting right next to the Boston dugout. My kid is on TV. People are texting me. He gets a ball. And it was a cold night. So the owners were sitting up in the box. And we had like seat 1A and B the year that the Red Sox won. So I've had a couple of these just unbelievable experiences. And the lesson there is that you do get on the plane and you do fulfill your commitment, because you never know. You may speak to 100 people, but then, the owner of the team is in the back.
But the moment that you get to create for your kid too, right? Like you're like the best dad ever in that situation.
It was fun.
And you get to stay up past his bedtime, which is always wonderful.
Yep.
Scott Harrison is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. One of the things I wanted to ask you is kind of take you through your trajectory, because I've known your story. I've heard your story. So I'll just ask it this way. Let's start with 16-year-old Scott Harrison. Who is the 16-year-old Scott Harrison?
Sure. I wanted to be a doctor to cure my mom, who had gotten sick when I was 4 and had become an invalid. There was a terrible carbon monoxide gas leak in our house that almost killed all of us. Dad and I bounced back. Mom never did, and was just irreparably damaged from the accident. So I was the good Christian kid, only child, in a caregiver role, taking care of his mom, playing piano, in Sunday school, and, wanted to go to Johns Hopkins. 2 years later was a very different story, Jason.
What happened 2 years later?
Well,
Scott?
2 years later, I moved to New York City, grew my hair down to my shoulders, joined a rock band, and became a nightclub promoter, and started doing smoking 2 packs a day of cigarettes, drinking heavily, and doing drugs. So
different person.
Very, very different person.
How about when you were 30? Because I think that's around the time when things started to change.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah, that was Act 3. It was around 28. So
28.
I'd moved to the city just in a me first classic rebellion story. Don't want to play by the rules of the church. It's my turn to explore and have absolute unfettered freedom. And that led me to a 10-year exploration of nightlife in New York City, working at 40 different clubs, selling $1,000 bottles of champagne, $25 cocktails, the velvet rope, where we would turn away 1,000 people a night trying to get into the club. All this kind of self-importance that was really quite meaningless. And at 28, it took me 10 long years to realize that I had made a mess of my life, and that there would never be enough, and somebody would always have more. And this kind of endless pursuit of selfishness would leave no meaningful mark or legacy on the planet. And that was kind of Act 3, where I wound up selling everything I owned and joining a humanitarian medical mission in Liberia, West Africa, which was the poorest country in the world. So it's a pretty extreme turn there. I'm like, what is the opposite of my hedonistic, drunken, drugged out life look like? Let me go join a group of Christian doctors in the poorest country in the world as a photojournalist and pay them $500 a month for the pleasure of joining their mission, and see where that takes me.
So you grew up in the Christian world, and you were a believer, or you were a Christian, or you went to church.
Sure.
We'll just
say
that.
I was baptized at 13, and
there you go. So something happens. Those 10 years that you kind of grow your hair long, and you kind of go and you live this lavish and crazy lifestyle, but to then go back to the, when you're going to Liberia, and you said it's a Christian organization. I'm not saying that you suddenly had this 180 and this sort of revelation from God, but did your walk with Christ enter into that? I'm imagining it's sort of a rededication.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I realized that I was the most, I was morally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt. And, I started reading the Bible again at 28. I started reading A.W. Tozer and theology, and trying to find meaning and purpose, and trying to find my way back home, but maybe without some of the religiosity or the rules, opting back into faith as a 28-year-old felt very different than what I was maybe forced or told I had to believe growing up. And that was a big part of my story. And I knew I needed to change community as well. Being around people who were getting drunk and doing drugs every night was going to be really hard to stop doing those things. How about a group of Christian doctors who, instead of going on vacation to the Caribbean, we're flying into West Africa to operate for free and provide medical services to people who couldn't afford it in a country where these services just actually didn't even exist many times. So it was a big turn. And I had this, again, I'm a pretty extreme person. So the night before I joined this humanitarian medical mission, I got fantastically drunk. I smoked 60 cigarettes and I'm like, I'm going to go out with a bang, but then I've got to quit it all. And, never touch coke or any of that again, never smoked another cigarette, never gambled again, never, looked at a pornographic image again, just had to kind of walk away from this really pretty destructive lifestyle. And there was something symbolic about a ship sailing away to a new continent and in a way to a new life. And that moment was 17 years ago.
Wow. What happened when you were in West Africa? What did you see that changed everything for you in the sense of what you're doing now?
Well, our patients, so our hospital ship could take on about 1,500 patients every mission. And we had 3 operating theaters, a 40-bed state-of-the-art hospital ward. And I remember, so my job was going to be to document all 1,500 sick people for the medical library and then document their transformation, right? So you have this kind of before and after. Someone who was blind with cataracts who could now see, someone born with a cleft lip who, had that repaired. And the third day in Africa, I was told we would have this patient screening, almost like a cattle call for sick people. And then we would hand out these surgery cards, and we would over the next period of months say, hey, you turn up on the 16th of May and at 9:00 and you'll receive your surgery. Well, the third day I was there, I knew we had 1,500 slots to fill. I remember thinking, like, is it possible that there are 1,500 sick people, with these conditions that we specialized in: facial tumors, clefts, burns, flesh-eating disease? I mean, just some pretty out there stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget at 5:30 in the morning, kind of in a Land Rover, wearing hospital scrubs with a bunch of doctors, headed toward the soccer stadium in the center of Monrovia, Liberia, where the government had given us this space to screen the patients. And there were 5,000 people standing in the parking lot waiting for us to open the doors.
Wow.
And that was a really impactful moment. I remember just weeping with some of the others, realizing, oh my gosh, so we're going to send 3,500 sick people home with no help and no hope. And, that then led to that year that I'd signed up for turned into 2 years. And what I learned was so many of the people were standing there. So many of the people were sick because they were drinking dirty water. And the root cause of half of the sickness in the country was unsafe, dirty, contaminated, disgusting, diseased water. And half the country also didn't have clean water to drink. So I just remember putting those two things together, like, wow, half the country I'm living in is drinking dirty water, and half of the disease in the country is because people are drinking dirty water. Who's working on that? And at the time, there were 1 billion humans, Jason, worldwide, who were living without clean water. 1 out of every 6 people alive was drinking disgusting water every day. Now it's 1 in 10. So we're down to 770 million. We've made some progress, but still, 2 Americas full of people right now, as we record this, 770 million people going without the most basic need for life or for health. So that's the problem I've been working on for a decade and a half now.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to be moved by something and to want to help. It's another thing to go and completely do what you did with Charity Water and have done with Charity Water for so many years. What was that like early on to start it up and actually make it a thing, right? It's one thing you could go work for a company and donate your time and your efforts and your money and serve that way. But you wanted to create your own thing, or felt like God was leading you to a place to create Charity Water. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, I was naive. I was 30 and I didn't know any better. And if you'd asked me at the time, I'm going to not only solve the water crisis in just a couple of years, but then go, solve hunger and, HIV, AIDS. And I mean, I was this kind of idealistic kid, literally right off a boat. I mean, I was right off the boat, the hospital ship. And I also had the advantage of not knowing anything about institutional philanthropy. So I didn't know philanthropists. I hadn't ever worked at a charity or a foundation, and I didn't really know how you were supposed to do things. So I came at this with a really open-minded entrepreneurial approach. How would you solve the water crisis? I mean, it was going to take billions and billions and billions of dollars. It was going to take a movement of committed people who would reject the apathy, that would be so easy to, accept with any of these global paralyzing issues. So how would I make a real dent? And there was just nobody else out there doing that. I mean, I think the largest water charity at the time when I started was raising about $15 million a year. That is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what is needed to actually make any real impact. So there was really no one to join, Jason. And I said, well, I'm going to start, and we're going to get this done. We're going to get millions of donors excited about solving this problem. We're going to build innovative, transparent, sophisticated, effective organization that is going to hire thousands of locals all around the world to actually construct these water projects and lead their communities and their countries forward. And then I had this idea at the very beginning: what if we could give away 100% of all the donations that came into the charity to directly help people get clean water?
Which is not common, by the way, right, Scott?
No, it's very, very, very rare.
Yeah.
But, I just had this, what I heard, Jason, was so many people said they don't trust charities. I don't know where my money goes. It goes into a black hole. Staff are overpaid, or, right. There were all these kind of scandals of, well, the money's mismanaged. I gave to some disaster and it never even made it to the tsunami victims or the earthquake victims. And I just thought that, it was ripe for disruption. And my big idea was open up 2 separate bank accounts, put 100% of the public's money in the one bank account that only funded water projects directly. And then in the second bank account, raise all that nasty overhead money, from a small group of donors. And I thought business leaders and entrepreneurs could get excited about paying for staff costs, paying for insurance, paying for phone bills and the office and the flights, as long as we could, turn that into more, right? We could go out and build a movement. And 15 years later, gosh, we've raised over $650 million through this model. And it's still pretty simple. About 120 families pay all the overhead so that millions of people can give in the purest way. So it's not really a mystery. We just need to convince 120 people that it's a really good idea to pay for, the toner for the Epson copy machine, or right, the paper clips in the office, so that anybody else out there, whether they give $1 or $1 million, can have this pure flow and then see their money tracked and see the impact of that.
So how did you do that, especially for the 120? How did you get them to buy into this model?
It was really hard in the beginning. I mean, I write about that, and I wrote a book about, almost going bankrupt and just all these moments where we were really at the precipice of the model not working, because it's just an idea in the beginning. There was a lot of favor. I mean, there was some crazy miracles. There was a moment where we had raised so much money for the water projects that the model was working. People were responding. People were saying, I would hear time and time again, this is the first charitable donation I've made in my life, because I know exactly where the money's going to go. But we were having a hard time raising the overhead money. And there was this one moment many years ago, early on in the organization in year 2, where we were bankrupt, we were insolvent, and I was going to shut the charity down and say, it just didn't work. This 100% thing is too hard. And then a complete stranger walked in the office and wired $1 million into the overhead account. So we've had so many moments like this, and we never really looked back from that moment. But there are so many kind of just crazy moments in Charity Water's history where, our backs were up against a wall, and, it felt like heaven opened, and,
right.
or some incredible gift that was unexpected from a stranger, showed up.
How has your faith grown during all of this? I'm really curious from the spiritual perspective, because I know you do a lot of interviews with a lot of, secular podcasts or TV stations or whatever. And we're sports and faith. So we're not, shying away from the faith aspect. I'd love to dive into that just a little bit and learn how your faith has grown as you've taken this leap of faith, for lack of a better word, to start Charity Water.
Well, yeah, I think it's worth pointing out. I mean, we're not a Christian organization, so Charity Water has no religious affiliation. I am certainly animated by my faith. I would be, probably dead right now if it was not for my personal, reconversion or recommitment. Sure. And I get to live out my faith every day by running an organization that helps people get clean water. So, it aligns with my theology, because I don't think anybody's drinking dirty water in heaven. I don't think any woman is walking 8 hours, at risk of rape or hyena attack to some river where she's going to literally kill her child with dirty disease water, but has no other option. So, through my work that is, you could argue secular in nature, and I get to bring the kingdom of God to earth through clean water. working with a lot of people who would never do what I do on a Sunday or never pray to the God that I pray to, but can stand for clean water. So I think, that's been actually really exciting to work with atheists and Buddhists and Mormons and the Jewish community and the Muslim community. And, all of these different diverse communities, work with Republicans and Democrats and libertarians and independents, and just try to elevate this common good, this one thing we can all agree on. People need water, right? They need clean water. And to then invite people to bring their generosity, their time, their talent, their money to this issue. Even though, many people might have massive differences on political issues or social issues, they don't have differences when it comes to getting people clean water. So I think that's almost felt missional for me, is a little bit of bridge building or peacemaking, just using this inarguable common good to invite people to just be a part of this, to be a part of this movement for good. I've seen answers to prayer. I mean, Jason, I wrote about this a lot in the book. And again, the book, was published with Penguin Random House. So, it's not a faith-based book, but there are definitely stories of, like, I prayed for the craziest thing and it happened. And I've seen that time and time. Most of the time, Jason, I'm not praying with any faith. I mean, if I'm honest, like, this isn't like, George Mueller or something. You're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, this isn't working and, we should just give up. But, here's a Hail Mary prayer. And then the most radical answers to those prayers would come in. And I think where it's left me 15 years into Charity Water is a reminder that this really isn't my idea. I mean, I think it's God's idea that, in the tragedy of Earth as it is today, the tragedy of 771 million people going without the basic need, we get to bring hope and human flourishing in the form of clean water. And that's a much bigger idea than, some kid off of a, ship that saw a few things in Africa, would have ever had.
That book is called Thirst, a story of redemption, compassion, and a mission to bring clean water to the world. 100% of the proceeds, as Scott mentioned earlier, from the sale of Thirst will fund clean water, which is really great. I do want to ask you if you have one more story connecting the world of sports. The great story of going to Fenway and having suddenly the Red Sox owner be in an audience. Is there another connection? Maybe it's an athlete who heard about your story or heard about Charity Water story. Is there a connection there?
Well, we've had some great athletes support us over the years. One that's become, just a good friend is a guy named Matt Hasselbeck. Who
we know Matt well.
Started with us many years ago. And he and his wife have been part of those 120 families for the last decade that have paid for the overhead. And it's really kind of the highest level of selfless giving. And, Matt and his family, they've sponsored projects. He's donated his birthday. He and his whole family with the kids have come to Africa to see it for themselves. And he's been a fantastic, generous, kind ambassador for the movement of clean water and a great friend as well.
Yeah, Matt and Sarah are the best and just great people and great supporters of Sports Spectrum as well. I love Matt. I actually donated for my 40th birthday, 8 years ago. I'm just dating myself on my age here.
We're dating him as well.
We're dating Matt as well. That's right. But for my 40th, I raised funds for Charity Water. I think it was like $1,200 or something with a very generous bunch of people back in 2013. What is the best way today that people, if they're listening, right, they want to be a part of Charity Water, know their money's going to help people in need? Sure. What's the best way?
We actually have an amazing community called The Spring. People can just go to thespring.com to learn more about that. And think of that as Spotify or Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus for clean water. And it's a group of people now across 149 countries who just give something every month, knowing that 100%, if they could give $10 or $40 or whatever it is, goes straight to getting people clean water. And then we're sharing stories of impacts. We're doing events with this community to really try to engage them and educate them. And that has been, since we started that, Charity Water has tripled in size and impact. So it's actually not been the billion-dollar philanthropists or these huge, gifts. It's been this growing community of people who said, well, alongside my Amazon Prime or my Hulu or, my magazine subscription, I could also help people get clean water every single month. So there's a great video as well on that landing page, thespring.com, that's gotten like 80 million views. And it's a kind of great nutshell of the charity water story and our values and the need for water and these solutions. Cause it's amazing we've helped 15 million people now get access to clean water. So it feels like we're at the beginning of the journey. Yeah. But it's 15 million people who would not have had water if our community hadn't stepped up and if people hadn't done something.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. Thespring.com is the website. My last question for you, we ask it to all of our guests here. What's God teaching you right now? What's he showing you when you think about what you just shared, your story, and where you are today? What's the great lesson God is teaching you right now?
Well, I think it's to be a little more content. And, I was born with this deep sense of dissatisfaction. We are never doing enough. We can always be raising more money, bringing more people into the movement, helping more people. And last year we raised $100 million for the first time ever in a single year. And, it's really hard for me to say, wow, like, we raised, our team came together and raised 100
in a pandemic, by the way, Scott, in a pandemic.
I know, but I'm like, it should have been 200 million. Right. Like, I wish we were smarter. I wish we'd launched more initiatives. I wish we'd helped twice as many people get access to clean water. So I've got some great coaches and some great mentors who are like, you have to stop and, almost take that mental picture, appreciate, be grateful, and then move on. There's nothing wrong with the pursuit of more, especially if the end goal is getting more people clean water. But sometimes it's hard to stop and be thankful and be grateful, with a sense of it's just not enough. It's never enough. It's never enough.
Yeah. Well, I think there's both sides of it. You be content, but at the same time, know that there's more work to be done. It's very much an athlete's approach or a sports in the sports world. That's the same way. You be content with this and be grateful for what you've been able to do, but understand that there's still a lot of work to do. So Scott, thanks for being here, buddy. This is great. Really appreciate getting to know you. Thespring.com is the website people can go check out for charity water, and his book, Thirst, A Story of Redemption, Compassion, and Mission to Bring Clean Water to the World is available now. Thanks buddy. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jason. You're awesome.
And many thanks to Scott Harrison for sharing his story here on Sports Spectrum and the great work Charity Water is doing. Again, that website, thespring.com, to learn more, as Scott mentioned in the conversation. I loved the story of him meeting the owner of the Boston Red Sox, or one of the owners, and ending up in those incredible seats to go to Fenway Park, and then his connection with Matt Hasselbeck. And we love Matt and Sarah, and they're just great people. And hearing how Matt is helping Charity Water is amazing as well. So we appreciate Scott for telling his amazing story. And again, thespring.com is the website to learn more and check out his book, Thirst, available everywhere books are found. Thanks to Scott for being here today on the show. Thank you as well for tuning in and listening today to Sports Spectrum. We bring Jesus into the sports conversation. Sometimes we do it with athletes and coaches, and sometimes we have people like Scott Harrison on and do it in a little bit of a different way. I just am such a big fan of what Charity Water is about, and really a big fan of Scott's story, because I just think it's important for those that feel like they have no hope to know that there is a guy like Scott Harrison who was in that same boat without hope and found hope in Jesus, and then really that motivated him and pushed him and maneuvered him into a space to become the CEO and creator of Charity Water to help people get clean water. So just love what we get to do here at Sports Spectrum. Love that you get to check us out and that you share this with someone. That would be amazing. Thank you again for tuning in. Make sure you click subscribe or follow so that you never miss a conversation that we have here on Sports Spectrum. So whatever app you're listening to, click that subscribe and that follow button. And then tune in next time for another edition of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.